All right, everyone, welcome to the latest edition of the Data Resilience SpectrumCast. Joined as always by my co-host, Randy Arsenault. Hey, Randy. And
Howdy.
we have our subject matter experts, Trisha Jang and Sean Sperry, with us today. Hey, guys.
Hey, Steve.
So we are on this journey of talking about the 6 key capabilities that are necessary for architecting a truly data resilient environment. And, so far we've talked about things around administrative security. We've talked about tools to be able to identify and monitor malicious activity going on in your environment. The last episode, we talked about pervasive encryption and making sure you're taking advantage of all the encryption capabilities your solutions have to offer. Today, we're going to talk about multiple layers of recovery. And us being the backup team or the data protection team, we should have a lot of expertise around multiple layers of recovery. So, Trisha, you're shaking your head, yes. When you hear multiple layers of recovery, and especially when thinking about cyber resilience, data resilience, or just data resilience in general, what comes to mind?
So 2 things come to mind. The first being having multiple timestamp points to go back to. So do I need to go back to the most recent version, or do I need to go back to how it looked 6 months ago? And then the other piece being, what exactly am I doing with the, is it a snapshot where I can recover everything really rapidly and then just put the new things on top of it? Or is it an individual file restore? So the types of data, a big block of it, or individual files that I'm bringing back.
Sean, how about you? What's your kind of thought process around this?
Well, for me, one of the ways I've heard it referred to, and it's an interesting way I thought when I heard this, was as a media break, right? Meaning in the sense that your data is stored on a particular medium, object storage, disk, tape, whatever the case may be. And what you're looking for is for your disaster recovery and that capability to be on a different type of media, totally different and totally separated from the original, right? So, that kind of rules out a lot of the capabilities that we have typically with, say, HA or high availability, right? That's really not going to help you in the case of a cyber attack. In many cases, in many instances.
Yeah, it struck me just kind of reading through some of the materials that you guys have put together and trying to kind of get a little bit more familiar with this whole concept. There's also an element of proximity. And Sean, you kind of touched on this. Like, not only do you need to have different points in time to do, application consistent and time consistent recovery points, but having physical and logical separation between the different copies and the different classes of copies and different classes of snapshots and backups is important as well in the event of some kind of a physical, event or some kind of a disruptive event that could render your data center or your, part of your data center inoperable. So interestingly, there's both a time and a space element to it, it seems like.
That's a good view of it, Randy. One of the things that I talk about when speaking to customers around data resilience and its multiple forms of backup is I go back to the very first conversation we had around architecture. And one of those key components was, don't architect your environment for backup any longer, architect for recovery. And so that comes down to a little bit of what Trisha talks a lot about, which is classifying your information, right? What we definitely know is that if we architect for the lowest common denominator, in other words, the application that needs the fastest recovery time, if we put 100% of our data kind of in that bucket and said, this is the one tool we're going to use for that, it would be too cost prohibitive to be able to implement. So having these tiers of way you protect information, so solutions such as snapshot backup solutions such as Protect Plus that can store data in its native format and recover that data really fast, can help achieve the goals of the really, really pertinent information. And then there's the streaming backups that come from Your traditional backup solutions like Protect or Net Backup or something like that, that might take a little bit longer, but they're also not the ones that are critical to run the business. So we all know that customers have multiple backup tools within their environment, right? Do you think that's because they're just picking backup products because new people are coming in, or do you think it's really because they are trying to segment their information to use the right tool for the right job?
Oh, I think it's all of the above, right? Part of it is a natural selecting a tool that they might be more cost efficient, right? Or a tool that might be better at doing some particular type of data protection or data resiliency operation than another tool. Part of it is saving money, but I think naturally, the good news is that is probably in some ways these days a good thing, right? Because I think back to my days in that I was involved with an accounting firm, right? And we always talked about controls for particular types of operations and how you wanted to have multiple points of control to prevent any one particular solution or one particular person from being able to do anything bad, right? And that kind of what derives from what you just said, right? If I have these multiple data protection, data resiliency solutions, then naturally I don't have one point of control anymore, and I'm afforded that kind of protection.
Yeah, redundancy, right? And I mean, but that also introduces additional levels of complexity and potential points of failure, right? Because now you've got probably multiple policies and multiple operational protocols depending on the solution and the environment it's protecting and what the policies are associated with that environment. So it all goes back to another term that we talk about, or another concept that we talk about a lot, which is the kind of need to have a robust environment that's well documented and well supported, and make sure everybody understands how it works, and that you maximize your recoverability in the event of some kind of severe disruption.
Well, that also means you need a robust tool to begin with, because if you have a tool like Spectrum Protect, which can do the snapshots, which can do the file level backups, which can do the backup to tape, backup to cloud, then you can diversify within that one product without needing the complexity of multiple products out there.
Point.
I mean, I think you want to be somewhat intentional. Maybe I exaggerated a little bit, or maybe I didn't say it perfectly, but you do want to be somewhat intentional about this, right? You don't want to have a million different tools just for the sake of having a million different tools, but you're going to take your principles of data classification, of cost, and now of data resiliency, ransomware protection, and kind of put those all together into some sort of plan that's going to maximize those results using those tools as you see.
And back to Steve's point, maximize your recovery time requirements. So if you need that fast recovery, then I've got to have that snapshot to bring back rapidly. If all I need is the ability to bring back an individual email, I've got to have that. So it's also looking at the type.
Yeah, this sounds vaguely like another concept from a bygone era. I'll date myself. It's kind of the classic struggle between best of breed kind of modular approach to solving that problem, or a more integrated open type approach that allows you to customize and tweak to suit your specific requirements. And I mean, you can make a case either way, I guess. There are certainly specific features and capabilities that some solutions have, not to name names, but there's some that are particularly strong for VMs, there's some that are particularly strong for bare metal, some that are particularly strong for containers, or taking an approach like using the Spectrum Protect portfolio and being able to do all of those, more than good enough to fulfill your requirements. I guess that's a philosophical debate, right?
So Tricia, you said something really important. You said use that snapshot to recover from. How do we feel about snapshots as a part of our overall backup scenario? What does it mean to us?
What it means is if that's the restore you need most rapidly, that's going to be the fastest way to get that point in time restore back. And then the nice thing is, like with Spectrum Protect, if I've got a restore of a snapshot, I can then go and do a restore of newer of my individual files and just update the small pieces of that afterwards. And so I think that snapshot does have the advantage of being a fast backup and being a fast restore.
Yeah, I would agree. So with the latest release of our Flash Systems products and the announcement that we had just a few weeks ago, we talked about adding a capability called safeguarded copy to the Flash Systems. Now, Flash Systems has always had snapshot capability, and I think folks that that have a mind like Tricia and Sean that you guys have pointed out, as far as I want to make sure that I'm using the right solution for the right job at the right time. I think turning that on becomes really important. And now we've added these new sets of capabilities. The new capability around safeguarded copy is the ability to kind of lock that down in an immutable volume, so that it's kind of hopefully impenetrable from any type of cyber threat. But when we think about, at least when I think about data resilience from an IBM standpoint, it's not just cyber threats, right? It's all of your data against human error, system error, natural disasters. So having that copy on the device, like you said, Tricia, very fast recovery, but, and 100% of customers are doing this, they're snapping data off the box as well, in case of one of those other things happens, right?
This is again where I get into debates with people, right? If I have a single box in a single location using, say, some sort of safeguarded copy snapshot, right? That's not a media break in my mind. And my question is, if that box blows up, or if IBM has a development mistake, God forbid, and releases some bad code, I know that never happened, right? Is that data still going to be there? And to me, that's where the redundancy of systems, the different media, et cetera, comes into play to give you that most effective.
And yeah, making sure that not all your data make sure not all your backup data is proximal to your production data. So again, you've got some distance logically and physically between your production data and your backup data.
Now, I have, and I'm sure all of us here have worked with many customers in the past and I guess this was pre-ransomware days, have been perfectly happy with just having an HA solution that was part of the software. And look, that's my backup, right? Or that's my data protection. I don't need any more than that. And I think the events of the last couple years have proved that that's not the case, right?
Yeah, I mean the threats are evolving, daily, right? So there was and again, we talk about this a lot, but I was watching, it was on Vice News or something recently. They did a feature on cyber resilience. I think we talked a little bit about it in the last episode. It has become a thriving ecosystem of businesses and entrepreneurs and consumers. It's insane. I mean, you can literally go like swipe your credit card and get a membership on a ransomware as a service website, make your selections of what kind of attack you want. Literally, you can do this and go initiate the attack, send your little note that says, here's, I need this much in Bitcoin. It's terrifying. I mean, it is becoming like a whole, underground economy around cyber attacks and data breaches. It's really scary. So we definitely need to evolve, and this multi-layer thing, I think, is a huge piece of it, because the more sophisticated the attacks are, the better they're going to be at finding not just your production data, but your backup data and attacking that as well. So again, more logical and physical distance you have between your production data and your backup data in all its versions, the safer you're going to be, I think.
That's the one thing. It's a good point, Randy. That's the one thing that we're slowly starting to find out as this stuff starts to evolve. The hackers are getting smarter. It's not just attacking your primary storage; it's going after your backups as well. Yeah. Sean, before we close out, you mentioned one thing a couple of times, kind of I don't know if people caught it, but I think it's a good time to point this out, because we are talking about backup and recovery. There are kind of the methodologies that we talk about when we advise clients around the best practices for recovery, right? And we talk about the 3-2-1-1 method, and you've kind of alluded to having this within your thinking process, right? So 3 copies of your data, 2 media types, 1 offline, 1 offsite. That's still kind of the best practices of today.
Yeah, I mean, that's the gold standard, right? It's I think the unfortunate truth is it's not cheap, right? It's expensive to do that kind of thing, but these days you need that type of redundancy to survive these types of attacks, right? It's the cost of doing business these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. Randy, we were doing some looking, and I'd seen some stuff most recently. I think it was the latest IDC report I read around data resilience, talking about kind of the number one way people are getting their data back is around backup. And you recently came across an article that was talking about multiple forms of backups to be able to make sure you can recover that information, right?
Yeah. I mean, as we were preparing for this episode, I thought it was kind of interesting because to me, as I say all the time, the least, deep domain expert or the least proficient domain expert in this group as it relates to data protection and recovery, a lot of it to me is pretty logical, right? And multiple layers and having logical and physical distance seems like a pretty sensible way to think about it, even if you're not a data protection guru like you guys. So I just doing a little research, I came across this company called DSM. They're a managed services provider they're actually based in Florida, but they're kind of a regional service provider. And interestingly, I just kind of quickly scanned through this article describing how they implement a multi-layer, DR and data protection scheme. And it's very much along the same lines as we talk about. So understanding what the requirements are and the policy basis for your RPO and RTO, understanding the cost of downtime for your business as a function of how much time you're down, how long you're down, and what systems of record are impacted, and then how to do multi-layer protection in terms of, again, as we talked about earlier, the time sensitivity and also the logical and physical proximity of that data to your production data. So whether it's continuous data protection and replication, point in time snapshot type recoverable, something like safeguard copy, for example, or whether it's a physical offsite backup. And they talk a little bit about immutability and, some of the things that factor into it. But I just thought it was kind of interesting that here's this even, relatively small, pretty modest, regional managed service provider that's adopting these best practices and, and selling them to their client base. So I guess the point is that this is not just a Fortune 500 phenomenon, right? This is something that everybody's considering, everybody's thinking about, everybody's trying to implement. And it's good to see that there are service providers who are filling that need and filling out their portfolio of services and offerings to include things like, multi-layer protection. So I think that's a step in the right direction.
I think Sean's dead on, right? I mean, part of the challenge with what I would see a small service provider having those offerings is, who's going to want to pay for all that, even though that is the exact right way. When you follow the best practices, when you follow the right methodologies, that's how you're supposed to do things. The question is, have we hit a tipping point yet where customers actually feel like, yeah, I need that level of protection?
Well, and we talked a few episodes back about the fact that eventually, in all probability, there's going to be some level of regulatory compliance requirement or government mandate. Look, if you are in the, healthcare and life sciences industry, or you're in financial services, like you must have this level of protection or this level of recoverability or, cyber resistance or, whatever the case may be, because it's becoming problematic enough now that not only is it affecting those companies' bottom lines and financial performance, and they're taking PR hits left and right, but I mean, their customers are being impacted, obviously, right? So, Microsoft, was it 3 days ago, had like 38 million people's, private information leaked as a result of a security setting on one of their Azure Workbench environments or something. So it's like there has to be penalties and responsibility for this, or else to the point Sean makes all the time, companies just won't make the investment because they don't see it as something they're going to get they can't monetize it. They're not going to get a return on it. So they have to be either positively or negatively incentivized. And, who knows, it could be some kind of a tax credit or some way to incentivize organizations to take that next step. But
Great.
We'll see.
John, Tricia, any final words here?
I'm just thinking, I'm in the data protection business and have been for 30 years. And to some extent, I hate data protection. I hate the fact that I have to do this stuff and think about it, right? I wish I didn't. I wish it just happened and it was easy and it didn't cost anything. But unfortunately, the reality is that's not what it is today, right? And even more so than when I started in this business 30 years ago, you better be thinking about this stuff no matter how big or small you are, because you're going to get hit with it.
Yeah, and I wonder when you buy ransomware insurance, if they look at what you have for your backup and if it's better backup, if they give you a discount. I wonder if that's a thing.
Interesting. Maybe that should be.
We should all become actuarials, data protection actuarials.
I think those methodologies are evolving as we speak, right? They have to be, right? That if I'm writing that kind of insurance, I have to be smarter about the way that I provide it and how I charge for it, because I don't want to charge the same thing for somebody who's really diligent and really being careful to somebody. It's the same thing when you buy car insurance, right? Do I want to charge the same car insurance to the person who's had 20 accidents to the person who's been a safe driver for 20 years? And the answer is no. I'm not going to stay in business like that if I'm in insurance.
Yeah.
Great. Team, thanks. Excellent conversation. Highly encourage customers to take advantage of the best practices that we laid out around the 3-2-1-1 methodology, and also ensure they're putting, multiple forms of recovery in place and really understanding the recovery principles that they need to have to meet their business SLAs within their environment. Next episode, we are going to dive onto the multiple forms of air gap and isolation, whether it be physical air gapping, logical air gapping, immutability. We'll break all that down, define it for you, and we'll see you next time.